is my pleasure to be here. And just to give you a little background on me, the beginning of my career was very left-brain oriented. I'm a Pricewaterhouse CPA, Stanford MBA, and Chief Financial Officer. But I reinvented my life mid-career. As a gerontologist, I have a graduate degree in gerontology from USC. And in my business, Encore Management, I specialize on elder care advisory services, Medicare advisory services, which are very topical right now during the annual election period, and then aging advisory services. But regardless of what I might have done in my professional life, my greatest accomplishment was the role that I played to my mother during the last 10 years of her life. Yes, she too had dementia, but as I characterized her, she was charmingly confused. So I'm going to talk today. This is a caregiver conference, and my goal is at the end of this is to hopefully change your perspective on your role as caregiver. But I want to start with acknowledging that this is probably the most difficult role that you will assume in your entire life. And if you haven't figured that out yet, I'm here to tell you it is going to be the most difficult role that you will assume. But it is also a role that has the greatest potential for joy. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, creating moments of joy. I'm going to start with you as caregiver, then talk about your family, then talk about your loved ones, and then we're going to get into some moments of joy stories all about people who would lack legal capacity but definitely still have the ability to find happiness in life. So first of all, caregiver stress really is real. So this might be a picture of you and 60% caregivers are women, 40% men, but I think the pictures of women really describe how you're feeling. So that's when you kind of have it together on the outside, but really on the inside you feel more like this picture. And on the weekend, this is actually probably exactly how you feel. But the best prescription I can give you for caregiver stress, because we know what happens, it will be declining health to you, the caregiver, is creating moments of joy. But first, you have to take care of yourself first. So that analogy in an airplane, put the oxygen mask on you first. You have to take care of yourself first. And I'd also like to add an additional airplane analogy, which is the one of if the plane goes into a spin, which is often how you feel, you are in a spin that you have difficulty getting out of. The only person that can get you out of that spin is the pilot, and you are the pilot. So you need to take care of yourself first. And so I'm here to remind you to remember, don't forget yourself. So often caregivers know these things theoretically, but they can't give their self permission to do some of the things that they know they really should do for themselves first. Great example, Slate magazine, Dear Prudence, the Dear Abby of today. There was written in by a woman who cares for her elderly parents and also for her husband who's ill. And she said all she wanted to do was go to a hotel. She wanted to read books by day and binge TV watch on Netflix by night. And her husband was making her feel guilty about it. And so both Prudence and I would say, you don't need to ask permission for something to do. If that's what you need to do, that is what you should do. So I'm here to remind you, don't forget yourself. So how do you do this? You have to ask for help. Frequently, caregivers don't ask for help. As we talked about caregiving, the primary support structure is the family. The family is the first avenue of help, but one of the untapped resources for a loved one is friends. So if you are caring for a loved one and you don't know the names and addresses of their circle of friends, you need to do that. So that's an untapped resource. If you have financial ability, even getting someone in for a short time during the week to help with some of the physical, activities in a home can be helpful to you to give you respite. And one of the greatest underutilized resources in this arena is geriatric care managers. So you need to ask for help, and then you might need to set boundaries. So for instance, one friend of mine, Nancy, she's an attorney. It was very difficult for her seeing her mother every day. It was negatively impacting her business. So what she did was she now goes to see her mother on Tuesday evenings and all day Saturday. And she sets aside that time, and it has really helped her role as a caregiver. So you might actually have to set some boundaries. But again, you're the pilot, you need to set those boundaries. And what brings you joy? Maybe it's exercising with your girlfriends. Maybe it's drinking with your female friends. Maybe it's going away for the weekend. For the guys, maybe it's playing golf, playing sports. Whatever brings you joy, you need to bring that to your life. And it's not just joy, because it also could be peace. What brings you peace? Actually, again, for Nancy, when I asked her just recently, what's been the greatest help to her in caring for her mother? And her response was going to church. So at age 63, she went and got her first communion and got confirmed. That brings her the ability to have the patience to deal with her mother, who's a very difficult woman. For some people, going to a caregiver support network is very helpful. But for other people, that's the last thing they want to do. They need to get a break from that role. So whatever brings you joy and peace is what you need to do for yourself. So now I want to talk a little about family. Family is the primary support structure for aging. So this is a family that I grew up with. It's Ozzie and Harriet. And maybe this is today's family, Ozzie Osbourne. So I don't know, it doesn't even look as functional as it used to be. So the reality is, most families are dysfunctional. I applaud those who have a functional family. Most families are dysfunctional. Family ties are less strong. Our parents did a really good job with boomers in teaching us to be independent. Also, the fact that we don't live near each other, there's no longer a nuclear family. Not that that is necessarily dysfunctional, but it doesn't work as functionally. The other point is that priorities are competing. So when my mother performed her role as caregiver, she was a non-working housewife. That non-working housewife doesn't exist anymore. Most caregivers are working. There might be long-distance caregiving, and now that there could also be a sandwich generation. So there's very competing priorities for today's caregiver and today's families. And respect for elders has declined, particularly in the United States. This is not a culture that has as much respect for elders. So the bottom line is that the primary support structure for aging is broken. And there's also generally an overlay of anger, of guilt, of resentment with that dysfunctional family. And the breakout strategy for that really is forgiveness. You really have to get to a point of forgiveness. And that's forgiving yourself for the role you may or may not have played during your life or even now as a caregiver, because there are no perfect answers. Forgive yourself, forgive your siblings, forgive them for whatever they did in the sandbox or for whatever they're doing to you now or whatever they did in the past. And forgive your loved one. If it's your parents and you never got along with your parents, if you're grateful to be alive, they had something to do with it. If it's your spouse and you have children, they had something to do with it. So you really do need to get to a point of forgiveness. And the reason is that forgiveness gives you back today, and your tomorrow. Otherwise, you are lost in yesterday. Would visit her, I'd say, well, why don't you bring my mother a vanilla milkshake? So you never know when you're going to get something to key on. So you're making the ordinary extraordinary. But let's start with some basics. This happens to be my Aunt Greta at 105 years old. She look good, feel better. So this is for the women, but it also applies for the men, but more so for the women. And if you want, as you grow older, somebody to maintain the way you used to look, put it in your advanced healthcare directive that that's how you want to be treated. So Aunt Greta here is in a 3-piece cable knit burgundy pantsuit with her pearls, and my image of her is, I swear she had on black stockings and black Ferragamo pumps. If they had a Vogue for centenarians, my Aunt Greta could have been on the cover of that. So here's a picture of my mother. Even at this point, she cannot walk, she cannot feed herself, she's in a jerry chair, she has her earrings, she has her necklace, we generally had a flower in her hair, and she felt better just about how, just in feeling better and how she looked. So look good, feel better. This point I want to bring up is you really are panning for gold. And the story I want to share here is about, this is Pat and his family. Brian is the tallest. He's the head of this sibling group, good Irish family. And Pat has a very interesting background. And fortunately, Brian is able to spend quite a bit of time with his father, and they frequently have an afternoon tea. And he listens to his dad's stories. And one of the comments he made was that, you know I hear the same story, but I always hear something new. You know, it is the same story, but there's always a nugget of something new that I hear. So you never know when you're going to get a nugget, and you never know if that nugget is going to be about you. So I would say that you're panning for gold, looking for nuggets. So, some basics. The power of touch, it is really important. And if you think of your loved one, and if they're in any type of communal facility, when do they get touched with love and affection? The power of touch it's just so powerful. So here's my mother and I. We used to put our foreheads together. I was always holding her hand. Every time I went to be with her, I was always holding her hand. So I encourage you, even if that isn't something that was done in your family, it certainly wasn't done in my family, but do it. The power of touch is so very important to both of you. The power of words. You never can say I love you too often. Now I learned this from my 10-year-old goddaughter, who would, when she was calling me, she'd say, I love you, Esther. And my family, that is not how my family spoke. So I was able to learn that at an older age. So I encourage you you can never say I love you too often. And if you don't know how to say it, use Hallmark. I would really encourage you to use Hallmark to say what you are not able to say yourself. So it really all does go back to family. So whether you have a large family or in this instance a smaller family, family is going to be the first place that you're going to find examples of creating moments of joy. We are social animals. That social structure, the people in our lives, it is usually family. That being said, because there are a lot of dysfunctional families, do not underrate the role that friends play. Think of yourself now. Do you have a lot more friends that you're closer to than family? Then make sure that that group of friends is not lost. So my mother had a saying that came from my grandmother, to have a friend, you have to be a friend. I think women do this better than men, but don't assume that this is just talking about women and their women friends, because this is Al and Napoleon. I met them when I was training for one of my bicycle rides, and I saw them every morning. Turns out Al was they didn't know themselves from work, but they met, they started walking every day. Al was in management, Napoleon was in the union, and so they would be, I'm sure they were out there this morning talking about who's going to be the next presidential candidate. So very involved. You know that if either one of them is ill, the other person would be there, would want to be there. So don't let your loved one's friends walk out of their life. Now, grandchildren. Now we know women would just love to have any grandchild around, but also don't assume that doesn't apply to men. And here I have a picture of Linda's father and his grandson, Linda's nephew. Aunt birthday, a good event. But the power of touch. You never know when you're going to get one of those nuggets. Pet therapy. Okay, we go from human beings to other beings. Pets can be an extremely important part of someone's life, and either a responsibility for an animal, or just the companionship, or the personal, just the feel-good vibes of a cat. Now this is Cheryl's mother, and this is Yum Yum, her cat. And then this is Doris. And Doris, this is when they brought in, when my mother was in skilled nursing, I met Doris, and she lived on the other side of the hall, and I noticed that her room had doors on there were dogs all over her room, and I said, "Oh, I see you like dogs." And her response was, I love all animals. I like all animals and some people. So, unconditional love, the importance, there might be pet therapy that might be at the community that your family might be in. You're seeing that more and more. It used to be that the pets were brought in a certain time during the week. Now you might see a pet at the community. So pet therapy. Music therapy. This is just turned